A couple in Berrien Springs bring home the last adopted orphan out of Crimea.
The Student Movement editor chats with our reporter about the first ever LGBTQ issue.
And we hear from you. What are your thoughts on the upcoming LGBT presentations?
This week in Andrew's history.
Plus a look at what's ahead on campus this week.
Along with your weather's forecast.
AU News starts right now.
This is AU News.
Hello, I'm Emmanuel Leonard. Welcome to AU News, a production of the Advanced News Writing class in the Department of Communication.
And I'm Stephanie Racinos. Berrien Springs resident Christine and James Proctor recently brought home Melissa, the last adopted orphan out of Crimea. It was a race against the clock to leave the country, as hours later, Crimea was annexed by Russia and adoptions by Americans were no longer allowed. Here's Eloise Ravel with the riveting story.
Earlier this year, Christine and James Proctor decided to adopt 15-year-old Melissa from the Ukraine, but while they were waiting for the necessary documentation, the political situation exploded.
There was a lot of protesting going on in Ukraine during the time that we had been there visiting, but while we were back here, things just really got really scary and really violent. There was a lot going on in Crimea at that time. Simferopol was kind of a hotbed. A lot of Russian soldiers had come to that area. There was a takeover of the parliament at gunpoint and a lot of changes that happened. So we were really in a scary scenario.
After they received the documents, the Proctors traveled to Crimea for a court hearing. They were required to wait 10 days to complete the adoption process. At the end of the 10 days, Crimea was in the midst of becoming part of the Russian Confederation, and so the legal documents were difficult to get. They decided to go back to the Ukraine to try and get the documents there.
But before we could do that, we had to leave Crimea, and we had been hearing a lot of stories about people who had been on the trains with searches being done. We didn't know because the area was in between being Ukrainian and being Russian. It wasn't really either. We weren't really sure what we were going to encounter.
After convincing the train conductor to let Melissa on the train without a passport, they were finally on their way out of Crimea.
It was about 4 hours into the train ride that we stopped at the border, and the soldiers came and were talking to the conductor, asked him if there were any foreigners, and he told them that there were 3, 2 Americans and 1 Ukrainian, which was interesting that Ina was considered a foreigner, even though she was Ukrainian. So they didn't ask any additional questions. So we really feel like that was a miracle that we were able to just answer the question and then be able to move on.
The next few weeks were a series of dead ends as it proved difficult to get a passport for Melissa.
It just feels like every time we tried to make some progress, we just took a couple steps back. But really try to just be in the present and trust that God knew the bigger picture.
Their situation seemed impossible, but then their story began circulating on the web and hundreds of people had the Proctors in their prayers. One of those people was Carol Jordan and her Pioneer Memorial Church Grow Group, who would pray for them at each of their meetings.
So she talked about those things, and so our group got quite emotionally involved. We were invested in it.
After 31 days waiting for the necessary documents, the Proctors' prayers were answered and Melissa finally received her passport.
We really feel like there were insurmountable obstacles that we had, and that with so many people praying for us, we just feel like we were surrounded and that God was able to work His plan and to have everything kind of come together in the end, even though it didn't seem like it was a smooth process by any means.
This is Eloise Ravel for AU News.
We're joined in our studio today by the Student Movement editor, Melody Roshman. Welcome, Melody.
Thank you for having me.
Last week, you dedicated the entire paper to the LGBTQ community. What inspired you to do that?
Well, I feel like a lot of the time in our church, I've noticed that we talk about the LGBTQ community as if they're an issue or something that we just have sermons about and have debates about, whereas they're real people created by God who, go to classes and eat in the cafeteria and are so much like the rest of us. And so I really wanted to give them a forum to tell their stories, because when I was elected student movement editor, I vowed to be the voice of all the students, even the ones who aren't necessarily in the mainstream.
That's so cool. So tell us, what are some of the reactions you've received?
Well, to my surprise, admittedly, reactions have been overwhelmingly positive. I knew I was walking into a controversial subject when we decided to do this, but over the last week I've received over 50 emails and Facebook messages of thanks and support from members of the LGBTQ community and allies inside and outside of the church. We've had 77-year-old women write to us about their sons. We've had teenagers write to us. I've heard from people in the Netherlands and Australia and Argentina today, and people outside the church. Someone from Calvin College emailed me this weekend. More excitingly, perhaps, we were reposted on Spectrum magazine's website yesterday, and since then the article has accrued over 220 comments.
Wow.
That's been more controversial, but still very exciting.
That's amazing. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for joining us, Melody.
My pleasure.
In our question of the week, we asked you about the upcoming LGBT presentations on campus this week and next. Here's what you had to say.
I think that this LGBT conversation really needs to happen.
This is a really big issue and topic in the church, and it needs to get sorted out and talked about.
I'm glad it's happening because I believe important issues should be discussed no matter what side of the issue you're on.
I think it's great that the school is going to be having a conversation about the LGBT.
Just so that both parties, those who are pro, those who are against, can have a better idea of the entire issue.
I think that it is a great idea to have a conversation about this because it seems to be something that is just pushed under the rug.
Regardless, heterosexual, homosexual, I think an open discussion is helpful for everybody.
So will I be going to this LGBTQ conference? Yes.
I will not be going.
I don't even know the time.
I will be going.
This week in Andrew's history. From the time it moved from Battle Creek to Berrien Springs in 1901 until 1960, the school was called Emmanuel Missionary College. When the seminary and graduate programs also moved to Berrien Springs, the institution was renamed, but it took quite a while to decide on a name. On April 15, 1959, the board voted to call the school Lake Michigan University, but people on campus really didn't like the name. Finally, on April 4, 1960, the board voted to name the school Andrews University. Here's what's happening on our campus this week. This Friday and Saturday at 7 p.m., the music department presents a special free Easter production, The Passion According to Matthew, at the Howard Performing Arts Center. The Division of Student Life is sponsoring a conversation with LGBT students in the Buller Hall Auditorium this Saturday at 4 p.m. If you're interested in growing a garden this summer, the university is offering plots at $20 for Andrews students. You'll need to visit Smith Hall Sunday, April 27th to reserve your spot.
Your weather this week. The weather still seems to be making up its mind as it just snowed a few days ago. That should be the end of the cold though, as the week will be warming up steadily for the weekend. There is a chance of rain on Friday, but it should be cleared by Sabbath and the rest of the weekend. Rain is predicted on Monday though, but Tuesday and Wednesday seem clear.
Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of AU News. We look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day and God bless.
See you next time.